The blood on my steering wheel wasn't mine. It was sticky, cooling, and smelled like old pennies. My car was a wreck in the rain, but I wasn't looking at the damage. I was staring at the burner phone I'd just ripped from the hands of the man who tried to kill me. My son Leo is dying. His liver is failing, and the doctors say he has exactly 48 hours left. But here is the thing that's rotting me from the inside out. The hospital just ran the donor tests. They told me my husband David isn't the father. That's impossible. I was there. I gave birth to him. Or at least, I thought I did. I just checked the last number dialed on this killer's phone. It belongs to the one person I thought could save us. Now I'm standing in my kitchen, and I see my wedding photo is turned face down on the counter. Someone was just here. My husband is at the hospital, and I'm starting to realize I don't know who is sleeping in my bed or whose child is dying in my arms. Let me take you back to where this began. The wipers on Sarah Miller's SUV fought a losing battle against the Seattle deluge, a rhythmic thwack-shink that sounded like a blade being sharpened against wet stone. Every few seconds, the world outside dissolved into a gray smear of brake lights and neon signs reflecting off the flooded asphalt of I-5. Sarah gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles ached, her fingers twitching toward the center console where a stolen medical file lay hidden beneath the passenger seat. The heavy paper crinkled with every shift of the car. A dry, accusing sound that cut through the hum of the heater. Inside that folder lay a truth that felt like a physical weight, pressing the oxygen out of the cramped cabin. The lab results for her 12-year-old son, Leo, were clear, cold, and mathematically impossible. Leo was dying, his liver failing with a quiet, jaundiced cruelty. And in her desperate search for a donor match, Sarah had unearthed a biological void. David, the man who had held her hand through 3 miscarriages, the man who had rocked Leo to sleep for a decade, was not the boy's father. The realization didn't come as a slow burn. It was a flash freeze. Sarah's mind, usually a sanctuary of orderly spreadsheets and clinical data, scrambled to re-index 12 years of memories. She thought of Leo's golden brown eyes, so unlike David's slate gray gaze. She thought of the perfect timing of his birth at that small, private clinic in Oregon. Every mile she drove toward the city center felt like she was peeling back a layer of her own skin. The rain hammered the roof, 1,000 tiny fists demanding entry. As she navigated the slick exit ramp, her pulse a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. She wasn't just a mother anymore. She was a forensic auditor of her own life, and the numbers weren't adding up. The diner was a relic of a different era, tucked into a shadow-drenched corner of the industrial district, where the streetlights flickered with a dying orange pulse. Sarah pushed through the heavy glass door, the bells above chiming a lonely, metallic note that was immediately swallowed by the hum of a prehistoric refrigerator. The air smelled of burnt chicory and the oily residue of 1,000 fried breakfasts. In the back booth, Mike Davis sat surrounded by a small mountain of sugar packets. He was meticulously sorting them by the date written on their edges in his cramped, frantic handwriting. The rustle of the paper was the only sound in the booth until Sarah slid onto the cracked vinyl seat. "You're 30 seconds late, Sarah," Mike said, not looking up. He tucked a packet from a 2014 Kansas City steakhouse into his vest pocket. "I was starting to think the rain got you." "The rain is the least of my problems, Mike." Sarah placed the stolen file on the table with a heavy thud. The sound echoed in the empty diner. "Look at the markers. Chromosome 6, the HLA typing. It's a 0% match for David." Not a mutation, not a statistical outlier. It's a total disconnect. Mike stopped his sorting. He picked up the file, his eyes scanning the data with the practiced speed of a man who lived in the margins of other people's secrets. He pulled a packet of sugar from his pocket, tearing it open and pouring the white crystals onto the table in a neat line. This isn't just a secret, Sarah. This is a construction. You don't get this kind of error at a high-end clinic like the one in Oregon without someone building a wall around it. The nurse, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. The one who signed the birth record. Martha Cook. I found an address in a suburb outside Portland. If she's still alive, she's the only one who can tell me whose blood is actually running through my son's veins. Mike nodded, his fingers tracing the line of sugar. We leave tonight. If Leo only has days, we don't have hours to waste. I'll prep the car. You get some. A sudden, violent crunch of metal on metal shattered the conversation. The diner's front window buckled but didn't break as a black sedan slammed into Sarah's parked SUV just outside. The screech of tearing steel was a physical blow, vibrating through the floorboards and into Sarah's teeth. "Stay down!" Mike yelled, his hand diving into his trench coat for his sidearm. Through the rain-streaked glass, Sarah saw a figure emerge from the sedan. The man was a shadow in a dark hoodie, his face obscured by a mask that looked like a void against the streetlights. He wasn't there for a hit and run. He carried a heavy, rusted tire iron that glinted with a dull, murderous light. He lunged toward the diner door, his boots splashing through the deep puddles with a heavy, rhythmic thud. Sarah didn't think. She reacted. As the man burst through the door, the smell of wet wool and cold exhaust trailing behind him, she gripped her heavy, industrial-grade flashlight, the one she kept for emergencies. The assailant swung the tire iron, the metal whistling through the air, inches from Sarah's head. She felt the rush of wind, the cold breath of a near miss. She lunged forward, swinging the flashlight with every ounce of terror-fueled strength she possessed. The heavy casing connected with the man's wrist with a sickening crack. He let out a strangled yelp, the tire iron clattering to the linoleum floor. Mike was up now, his boots skidding on the floor as he leveled his weapon. "Hands. Show me your hands." Mike's voice was a jagged saw. The attacker didn't wait. He scrambled backward, his injured arm cradled against his chest. In his haste, a small, black object slid from his pocket. A burner phone, cheap and plastic, hitting the floor with a hollow click. He dived back into the black sedan, the tires screaming as the car peeled away into the curtain of rain. Sarah stood gasping, the smell of ozone and burnt rubber filling her lungs. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She reached down and snatched the burner phone from the floor. The plastic was cold, wet with a smear of the attacker's sweat. "I got it," she breathed, her voice cracking. "I got something." Mike holstered his gun, his face a mask of grim focus. "Let me see that." He took the phone, his fingers flying over the keypad. He wasn't looking for photos or messages. He went straight to the call log. Sarah watched him, hope blooming in her chest like a fragile flower. This was the break she needed. This phone was a tether to the person who wanted her dead, the person who knew the truth about Leo. If they could track this, they could find the architect of the lie. "Look at this," Mike said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "He made a call 2 minutes before he rammed your car." "Who?" Sarah leaned in, her glasses fogging from her frantic breath. "Is it David? Is it someone from the clinic?" Mike turned the screen toward her. The last dialed number was saved under a single, chilling name. The Shepherd. "I don't recognize the name," Sarah said. her brow furrowing. But the number... Mike, look at the area code. It's Oregon. Subverted. Sarah felt a surge of professional triumph. She had outplayed them. She had the phone, she had the number, and she had Mike, the man who could find a ghost in a blizzard. Trace it, Mike. Use that system you told me about. If we can pin this shepherd to a location, we have the whole thing. We can go to the police. We can save Leo. She pictured the sequence of events. The trace would lead to a high-rise office or a hidden facility. The police would raid it, and the medical records would be liberated. The logic was sound, the path forward illuminated by the glow of the tiny screen. She felt her shoulders drop for the first time in 48 hours. She had been smart. She had fought back and won a piece of the puzzle. Mike nodded, his expression softening into a reassuring smile. You did good, Sarah. Real good. Most people would have frozen. I'll run this through the digital dragnet. Give me 5 minutes. He stepped toward the back of the diner, near the payphones, tapping away at the burner phone. Sarah sat back down, her hands still shaking but her mind already moving to the next step. She would call the hospital, check on Leo's vitals, and then they would drive to Oregon with the leverage they needed. The crisis felt manageable now. The monster had a phone number. Mike walked back, but his pace was different. He wasn't smiling anymore. He held the burner phone like it was a live grenade. What is it? Sarah asked, her stomach doing a slow, nauseating roll. Did the trace fail? The trace worked perfectly, Sarah, Mike said, his voice sounding like it was coming from the bottom of a well. I cross-referenced the number with the files I pulled this morning. The ones we were going to use to find your witness. He laid his own notebook on the table next to the burner phone. On the page was the address of the retired nurse, Martha Cook. And below it, the phone number Sarah had spent the last hour searching for. The shepherd isn't some shadowy boss, Sarah, Mike whispered. The shepherd is Martha Cook, the woman you thought was your only hope, the woman we were driving to see. The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow to the solar plexus. The air in the diner suddenly felt too thin to breathe. Her smart move, capturing the phone, hadn't given her a weapon against her enemies. It had revealed that her only ally was the one who had sent the killer. The nurse wasn't a witness waiting to be found. She was the sentinel guarding the gate. She knew we were coming. Sarah realized, her voice a ghost of itself. She didn't just sign the papers 12 years ago. She's still watching. And Mike, if she's the one who sent the man with the tire iron, she knows exactly where we are right now. The bells above the diner door didn't chime this time, but the hair on the back of Sarah's neck stood up. The victory of the burner phone had been a breadcrumb trail leading them right into a slaughterhouse. She looked at the sugar packets on the table, now scattered and messy, and for the first time, she saw the trap for what it was. A perfect, closed loop. The drive back to the hospital was a blur of neon and terror. Sarah's SUV, its rear bumper hanging like a broken jaw, rattled with every pothole. She didn't look at Mike. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the shepherd saved in that phone, a digital wolf in nurse's clothing. When they reached the sterile white-on-white sanctuary of the hospital, the air changed. It was colder here, smelling of industrial bleach and the metallic tang of blood. Sarah hurried toward the pediatric intensive care unit, her heels clicking a frantic code on the linoleum. Dr. Aris met her at the heavy double doors. His face was a map of exhaustion, his surgical mask hanging around his neck like a white flag. Sarah, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of bad news. We've had a shift, a significant one. Sarah felt the spreadsheet in her mind begin to stutter. Quantify it. Give me the bilirubin levels. What's the clotting factor? The numbers don't matter as much as the clock, Sarah, Aris said, stepping closer. He smelled of stale coffee and latex. His liver is no longer processing the toxins. We're seeing early signs of encephalopathy. If we don't have a donor on the table in 48 hours, his brain will begin to swell. We won't be able to bring him back from that. 48 hours, Sarah repeated. The number felt like a death sentence. I need a computer. Now. She didn't wait for permission. She dived into the small, glass-walled research alcove near the nurse's station. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the standard hospital portals. She was a doctor, but she was also a woman who had spent a decade auditing medical errors. She knew how to find the back doors. She targeted the Oregon Clinic's digital archives. If Martha Cook was the shepherd, then the clinic's servers were the flock. She needed the original, unedited transfer logs from 12 years ago. The physical files could be forged, but the digital footprints, the time-stamped entries of blood types and donor IDs, were harder to scrub. Come on, she hissed at the screen. A blue progress bar crawled forward, 10%, 20. The screen flickered. A line of red text appeared at the bottom. Remote access detected. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't alone in the system. On the right side of the monitor, a window opened. A cursor moved with predatory grace, clicking through the very folders she was trying to download. No, Sarah whispered, her fingers frantic on the keys. She tried to block the remote user, tried to divert the data to a secondary drive, but the other user was faster. Folder by folder, the archives began to vanish. Asterisk, file deleted, file deleted, file deleted. It was a digital execution, a systematic wiping of Leo's history while Sarah watched, helpless. The final file, the one labeled Miller S. Maternity, flashed for a second before it too, dissolved into a 404 not found error. The screen went black, leaving Sarah staring at her own pale, terrified reflection in the glass. They're erasing him, she told Mike, who was standing in the doorway, his hand habitually checking for his sugar packets. They just wiped the only proof that he exists. We need to go home, Mike said, his voice low. If they're hitting the servers, they're moving on the physical locations too. We need to see what David has hidden in that house before they get there. The Miller home, a sprawling craftsman in the Queen Anne district, felt like a stranger's house as Sarah turned the key. The warm, amber glow of the porch light usually signaled safety, but tonight it felt like a spotlight on a crime scene. The air inside was stagnant, smelling of the lavender candles Sarah liked and the expensive cedarwood cologne David favored. But as she stepped into the foyer, something was wrong. The heavy, silver-framed wedding photo that usually sat on the console table was face down. The glass wasn't broken, but the position was deliberate. A middle finger to the life they had built. David, Sarah called out. Silence answered her, save for the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Thud-tock, thud-tock. She moved toward the kitchen, her boots echoing on the hardwood. The back door was standing wide open, swinging gently in the damp night breeze. The security alarm should have been screaming, but the keypad was dark, its small screen dead. Mike, get in here, she whispered, her hand gripping the edge of the counter. She felt a draft from the garage. The heavy steel door that led to the cars was slightly ajar. Sarah moved toward it, her mind calculating the risk. She needed her emergency kit from the garage, the one with the spare laptop and the encrypted drives. As she stepped into the cavernous, concrete space, the smell of gasoline and damp concrete hit her. The shadows between the storage bins seemed to stretch toward her ankles like oily fingers. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice echoing. A figure stepped out from behind David's pristine SUV. He was wearing a delivery uniform, brown shirt, cap pulled low, but he carried no package. In his hand was a heavy, industrial-sized zip tie, looped into a ready-made shackle. He didn't speak, he lunged. Sarah dived to the side, her shoulders slamming into a metal shelving unit. A box of old toys tumbled down, a plastic dinosaur bouncing off the concrete with a hollow thwack. The attacker was fast, his boots squeaking on the smooth floor as he cut off her path to the house. "David sent you?" Sarah gasped, scrambling backward. "How much is he paying you to keep his secret?" The man still said nothing. He reached for her, his fingers brushing the fabric of her coat. Sarah felt the cold, metallic bite of the shelving unit against her back. She was trapped. Her eyes darted around the dark garage, searching for a weapon, a tool, anything. Her hand landed on a plastic-gallon jug of industrial-strength degreaser she'd used to clean the driveway. As the man lunged for her throat, Sarah unscrewed the cap in one fluid, desperate motion, and threw the contents directly into his face. The man let out a high-pitched, gurgling scream as the caustic chemicals hit his eyes. He collapsed to his knees, his hands clawing at his face, the smell of harsh ammonia filling the air. Sarah didn't wait to see if he got up. She bolted through the door, slamming it shut and throwing the heavy deadbolt. Her breath came in ragged, burning gulps. "Mike, garage, now!" She didn't stop to wait for him. She ran to David's office. The door was locked, but Sarah didn't bother with a key. She grabbed a heavy bronze bookend from the hallway and smashed the wood around the handle until the bolt gave way. The office was a shrine to David's success. Mahogany, leather, and the faint scent of expensive bourbon. Sarah went straight for the desk. She knew David had a burn drawer, a place where he kept the things that didn't fit the narrative. She found the false bottom in the third drawer down. Inside was a single manila envelope. No labels, no dates. She tore it open. A bank statement slid out, dated 12 years ago, 2 months before Leah was born. It showed a wire transfer of $100,000 to an account held by something called Sunshine Adoption Services. Sarah stared at the words until they blurred. Adoption services. She had been there. She had felt the weight of her pregnancy. She remembered the morning sickness, the swollen ankles, the labor pains in that quiet Oregon clinic. Or did she? She reached back into her memory, trying to touch the details. She remembered the heavy sedation they gave her for the complications. She remembered waking up to David holding a swaddled bundle, his eyes wet with tears. He's perfect, Sarah. Our little miracle. The spreadsheet in her mind crashed. The data point she had built her life around, her own motherhood, was a forged entry. He bought him, she whispered, the paper fluttering in her trembling hand. He didn't just lie about the father. He bought the child. She looked at the bank statement again. Sunshine Adoption Services. She pulled out her phone, her fingers tapping the screen with a feverish, mechanical intensity. She logged a new apology in her spreadsheet. Entry 3144. Failing to know my own son wasn't mine. Severity, absolute. The search for the company returned nothing. No website, no business registration, no tax records. It was a ghost. A phantom entity designed to move children like cargo. The realization was a cold blade in her gut. If Leo was a product of a black market ring, there were no legal records. No birth certificate that wasn't a forgery. No way to find a donor because, in the eyes of the law, the boy in the hospital bed didn't exist. He was a stolen miracle, and the clock was down to 36 hours. The warehouse district of Tacoma was a graveyard of industry, where the skeletons of old factories rusted under the relentless Pacific Northwest gray. Mike Davis steered his battered sedan through the maze of cracked pavement, his fingers obsessively sorting a fresh stash of sugar packets he'd liberated from a gas station. The crinkle of the paper was the only sound against the low whistle of the wind through the car's weather stripping. "The address matches the routing number from the wire transfer," Mike said, his voice a low rasp. "It's registered to a holding company that hasn't paid taxes since 2012. Perfect place to hide a paper trail." Sarah stared out the window at the looming shapes of the warehouses. Her mind was a frantic loop of Leo's face and the Sunshine bank statement. If the digital files are gone, the ledgers have to be here. Martha Cook is a number 12 person, Mike. She doesn't destroy things, she organizes them. She'll have a physical backup. They pulled up to a corrugated metal building that looked like it was being swallowed by the earth. The sign above the door was faded to a ghostly white, but Sarah could just make out the shape of a smiling sun. The lock was a joke, a simple latch that Mike bypassed with a flick of a tension wrench. As the door creaked open, the smell of moldy paper and stagnant water rushed out to meet them. Inside, the warehouse was a labyrinth of rusted filing cabinets and overturned crates. Shredded documents lay like drifts of gray snow in the corners. Sarah pulled out a heavy flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. "There," she said, pointing to a small glass-walled office in the center of the floor. It was the only part of the building that looked untouched, a pristine island in a sea of rot. They broke the glass and stepped inside. The air here was drier, smelling of old leather and ink. On the desk sat a row of heavy, cloth-bound ledgers. Sarah grabbed the one labeled asterisk 2012-acquisitions asterisk. Her breath caught as she flipped through the pages. It wasn't a medical log. It was a ledger of human lives. Names, dates, and prices were listed in a neat, feminine script. Entry 442, male, Caucasian. Source, Portland General, unclaimed. Destination, Miller, D. Price, $100,000. Status, completed. Unclaimed, Sarah whispered, her thumb tracing the word. He was a discard, a baby with no one to look for him. But as she turned the page, a small, yellowed slip of paper fell out. It was a lab report, tucked into the binding. Subject 442, genetic screening. Blood type, O negative. Notes, potential HLA mismatch with primary donor. Cross-reference with biological father, ID Wilson J. Mike, look. Sarah's voice rose with a frantic, jagged hope. There was a father, a biological father. They didn't just steal a baby, they tracked the lineage. Wilson J. If he's alive, if we can find him. It's a lead, Sarah, Mike said, pulling out his phone to snap photos of the page. A real physical lead. If we can get this to a federal judge, we can force a search. We can save him. Sarah felt a rush of adrenaline so potent it made her dizzy. She had the name. She had the proof of the crime. The logic of the universe was finally tilting back in her favor. She gripped the ledger to her chest, the weight of it feeling like a shield. "We have to go," she said, her eyes bright with a desperate, newfound fire. "We have to get this to the hospital," subverted. Sarah turned toward the door, her mind already calculating the drive time to the federal building. She felt a surge of pride in her own persistence. She had found the one thing they tried to erase. She was the actuary of regret, But today, she was the actuary of salvation. "Wait," Mike said, his hand going to his holster. "Do you hear that?" Sarah froze. At first, there was nothing but the whistle of the wind. Then, a slow, rhythmic clapping began. Clap, clap, clap. From the shadows of the warehouse floor, a woman emerged. She was wearing starch-white nursing scrubs, her hair pulled back so tight it made her eyes look like slits. She moved with a calculated, surgical precision. "Very impressive, Dr. Miller," Martha Cook said, her voice like dry leaves on pavement. "I always admired your attention to detail. Most parents just take the miracle and never look at the plumbing." "Martha," Sarah said, her voice trembling, "I have the ledger. I have the proof of what you did. It's over." Martha smiled, a cold, thin line that didn't reach her eyes. "Is it? Do you know why I kept this office so clean, Sarah? Why I left those ledgers right where you could find them?" Sarah felt a cold prickle of unease dance across her skin. "Because you're arrogant. Because you thought I'd never find this place." "No," Martha said, her smile widening. "Because I needed you to bring me the one thing I didn't have, the one thing David couldn't give me." She gestured to the shadows behind her. Two men stepped out, the delivery driver from the garage and the man with the tire iron. Both were armed, their weapons leveled at Mike. "You see, Sarah?" Martha continued, her voice dropping to a soothing, motherly tone. "The digital wipe was just a nudge. I knew you'd come here. I knew you'd find the name Wilson. And I knew you'd bring your talented friend with his digital tools to help me find him." Sarah looked at Mike. He was staring at his phone, his face pale. "Sarah," Mike whispered. "The phone. When I took the photos, it triggered a geotag. It sent the coordinates of the ledger and the Wilson file to a remote server." "My server," Martha said. "You didn't find the solution, Sarah. You just completed the search for me. I've been trying to find James Wilson for 3 years. He's a ghost, a drifter who doesn't want to be found. But your friend here? He has access to the FBI's blue light database. And by taking that photo, he bypassed the encryption for me." The truth hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her smart move, finding the ledger and having Mike document it, hadn't saved Leo. It had given the kidnapping ring the location of the only man who could prove their crime. "You're not going to save him," Sarah realized, the ledger slipping from her numb fingers. "You're going to kill the father so there's no trace left." "I'm going to tidy up the records, Sarah," Martha said, nodding to her men. "And unfortunately, that includes you." The warehouse erupted into chaos. Mike dived behind a heavy metal desk, his gun barking a rhythmic, deafening response to the guard's fire. The smell of cordite and pulverized concrete filled the air. "Run, Sarah," Mike screamed. Sarah didn't think. She grabbed the ledger and dived into the maze of filing cabinets. The metal walls rang with the impact of bullets, a terrifying, high-pitched ping that vibrated in her teeth. She scrambled through the darkness, her lungs burning, her mind a frantic spreadsheet of escape routes. She found a heavy industrial lift, its chain hanging like a rusted noose. She swung herself onto the platform, the metal groaning under her weight. One of the guards appeared at the end of the aisle, his silhouette sharp against the flickering overhead lights. Sarah grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall and hurled it with all her might. It hit the guard in the chest, sending him sprawling into a stack of empty crates. She reached the back of the warehouse, a heavy steel door marked "Emergency Exit." She threw her weight against it, bursting out into the cold, rainy night. But she wasn't alone. Martha Cook was standing by a black sedan, her white scrubs glowing in the dark. She held a small, dusty document in her hand. "You want the truth, Sarah?" Martha asked, her voice calm despite the gunfire echoing inside. You want to know why Leo was unclaimed? She tossed the document onto the wet pavement. Sarah picked it up, her fingers shaking so hard she could barely hold the paper. It was a death certificate. Official. Stamped by the state of Oregon. Name: Infant Male Miller. Mother: Sarah Miller. Cause of death: congenital heart defect. Time of death: 4:12 a.m. *. Your son died, Sarah, Martha said, her voice devoid of pity. He died 10 minutes after he was born. You were sedated, screaming for a baby that was already gone. David couldn't handle the thought of you breaking. So he bought a replacement. He bought a life to cover a death. The world tilted. The sound of the rain, the gunfire, the wind. It all faded into a high-pitched whistling in Sarah's ears. Leo isn't mine, she whispered. Leo is a stolen child from a woman who died in a ditch, Martha said. He is a ghost, Sarah. And you've spent 12 years loving a lie. Sarah looked at the death certificate, then back at the warehouse where Mike was still fighting for her. The logic of her life had been stripped away, leaving only the raw, bleeding truth. She wasn't a mother. She was a caretaker of a crime. He's still my son, Sarah said, her voice cracking but firm. And I'm going to save him. She bolted into the darkness, the death certificate clutched in her hand like a jagged piece of glass. The hospital service tunnels were a subterranean nightmare of steam-belching pipes and flickering yellow lights. Sarah moved through the cramped concrete veins, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The smell of damp earth and industrial grease clung to her skin, a stark contrast to the sterile, white world just a few feet above her head. She knew these tunnels. She'd spent hundreds of hours volunteering here during her residency, learning the secret geography of the building. To the FBI agents swarming the lobby above, she was a fugitive, a co-conspirator in a kidnapping ring. To herself, she was the only person left who could save a boy who didn't legally exist. She reached a rusted maintenance ladder and climbed, her muscles screaming with fatigue. She pushed open a heavy floor grate and emerged into a darkened supply closet on the 4th floor, the pediatric wing. The hallway was a sea of blue and red flashes from the police cruisers outside. Sarah stayed in the shadows, her eyes fixed on room 412. David was there. He was sitting by Leo's bed, his head in his hands. He looked smaller than she had ever seen him, the granite jawline slumped in defeat. Sarah stepped into the room, the door clicking shut behind her. David bolted upright, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and relief. Sarah, he whispered, the FBI, they said you were involved. They said you ran. I know the truth, David. Sarah held up the death certificate, the paper damp and crumpled. I know about the $100,000. I know about the heart defect. David's face crumbled. He reached out a hand, but Sarah stepped back, her eyes cold. I did it for you, David said, his voice a broken rasp. You were falling apart, Sarah. After the 3rd miscarriage, the doctors said you wouldn't survive another loss. When he died, when our son died, I saw the light go out in you. I couldn't let you follow him. So you bought a child? Sarah's voice was a jagged blade. You stole a life to fix a discrepancy in mine? I gave him a home, David yelled, his knuckles cracking in that rhythmic 3-pop sequence. Crack, crack, crack. I gave him a mother. Without us, he would have been a ward of the state. He would have been nothing. He is dying, David, Sarah said, pointing to the monitor where Leo's heart rate was a slow, stuttering line. And he is dying because of your lie. Because there's no paper trail. Because the man who can save him is being hunted by the people you paid. She turned toward the door. "What are you doing?" David asked, his voice trembling. "I'm calling the FBI," Sarah said. "I'm giving them the ledger. I'm giving them the burner phone. And I'm giving them you." "Sarah, wait." "No." Sarah looked at the boy in the bed. The boy with the golden brown eyes and the gentle soul who apologized to his own soup. "I'm not an actuary of regret anymore, David. I'm an actuary of the truth. And the truth is the only thing that's going to save him." The media frenzy was a tidal wave. Within 6 hours of Sarah's confession, the stolen miracle was the only story in the country. The image of the hero doctor who turned in her own husband to save her kidnapped son was plastered on every screen from Seattle to Miami. And in a small, lonely farmhouse in Montana, a man named James Wilson sat at a table bolted to the floor. He watched the news, his weathered face illuminated by the flickering blue light of an old television. He saw the photo of the missing mother, the woman who had died in a ditch 12 years ago. He saw the photo of the boy. He didn't make a left turn. He drove 5 miles out of his way to make 3 rights, his blinker clicking for an eternity as he headed toward the airport. The transplant was a success. Weeks later, Sarah sat by Leo's bedside. The hospital room was quiet, the only sound the rhythmic hum of the monitors and the soft patter of rain against the window. Leo was awake. His skin was no longer jaundiced, his eyes bright and clear. He looked at Sarah, a small, hesitant smile on his face. "Mom," he whispered. Sarah took his hand, her fingers tracing the jagged tear in her own heart. "I'm here, Leo. I'm right here." "I'm sorry," Leo said, his voice a soft litany of unnecessary guilt. "I'm sorry I made everyone so sad." Sarah leaned down and kissed his forehead. "Don't you ever apologize for existing, Leo. You are the only thing in this world that isn't a lie." Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the soot and the secrets from the city streets. David was in a federal holding cell. Martha Cook was a fugitive, and the biological son Sarah never held was finally at peace in a marked grave. It was a bittersweet victory. The perfect life was gone, replaced by a messy, honest reality. Sarah pulled out her phone and opened the spreadsheet. She highlighted all 3,144 entries. She hit delete. The screen went blank. She didn't need to track her regrets anymore. She just needed to be a mother. And for the first time in 12 years, the numbers finally added up.